Hello and welcome, my name is Gerry van der Velde and I'm going to show you some card ideas with the new Beauty of Fall release. There are gorgeous colors and patterns in this fall line that all combine very well together. Now there are lots of options to choose from and to play with to make beautiful projects. And you will get an overview of what's available in this line at the end of the video. I've made a few cards with the 6x6 paper pads and the die cut block, which is really cool and so much fun to do. And I'm not going to show you how to make those because I know you can do that, because I want to show you something different. And for that I'm going to use the Christmas paper pad. Just forget that it says Christmas because these colors are a perfect match to all the colors in this collection. For the first card that I want to show you, I'm going to use scrapbook paper, the die cut block, a stamp and a slimline die, because slimline cards are really hot at this moment. And I want to show you how you can make a double slimline card. So I took one of the papers from the paper pad. I made a crease and folded part of it. Now I'm going to add my die just over the edge on the folded side. And then I tape it in place. Make sure it's lined up next to the edge. And the size of this die fits exactly on this paper, so make sure to check the back to see if the die is lined up at the edges of the paper. And then add it on the cutting pad and run it through your machine. And now I have my partially double card. I have cut another panel and I've added some tape to the back of the strip. And then I'm going to add the second panel in place. I line it up at the bottom and then I remove the backing pieces. And this is a great way to use smaller pieces of paper to make a bigger card. And this makes a nice slimline card base to start out with. For the next part I cut a bunch of pieces out of the scrapbook paper. And I also cut one of the tickets out of the middle of one of my layers. I always like to ink the edges. This will make all the parts stand out a little bit more. And to me it looks a bit more finished. But you can also use them just as they are without inking. Then I add the pieces together. And next I'm going to add my layers to the card. I make sure that the side with the folded flap is on the top, so it's not on the side where you want to write your sentiment. And then I add my first layer with some tape to the back. You can also use glue, but just use what you like best. Then I add my next layer. And then I have a stamp and I'm going to use the leaf of this stamp. I add that to my acrylic block and I ink it up with some oxide ink. It's always a great idea to make some tests with a new stamp just to feel how much pressure it needs. Now most of my stamp is going to be covered because I want to use it as a background. So if I don't get a completely crisp image, that's totally fine. But if you want your crisp image, then make sure to test stamp so you know how much pressure your stamp needs and that you ink it up well. So while I'm stamping I also add the pieces in place about where I want them to check where I want my stamped images and what places I want filled. And this will make that I can better see what I'm doing. So I always like to check in between. I've added the leaf stamp along the complete outside edge. And now I'm going to add a few more of the leaves on the left side because there wasn't much showing of that image there with the stamps on top. So I'm basically filling up the sides and also stamping over previous stamped images. And then when I'm done stamping the background, I'm going to add my layers. I've added some double-sided adhesive to the back, so I can add the pieces in place. And then I measure by hovering a little bit over my card, and then I add the images. And I also have a little sentiment from the die cut block that I'm going to add on one of my tickets. And this will give you a fun fall-themed slimline card. Next I have another slimline die. I have my stencil, I have the die cut block and I have one of the square paper pads. I've got 3 card panels and I'm adding the stencil on the lightest panel and then I'm going to add my ink with an ink blending tool. I'm using a Distress Oxide ink and I'm going over the stencil very lightly or very gently with the blending tool so I don't damage the sponge applicator. The stencil isn't big enough to fit the complete card, so I just move it over to the other side and see where I can put it best to make a nice background pattern. And for this technique you don't need a lot of ink on your blending tool, just a little bit will work just fine. So I decided to add 2 more a bit lighter colors with the same stencil, and I moved the stencil a little bit so the leaves are filling up in the open spaces. I ink up the blending tool and then I spread the ink a bit by going over a scrap piece of paper, and then I apply the ink through the stencil again and turning it once more. When you add the stencil, just look for some open spaces and then you can add your next layer. And this will make a fun leafy background. Next I have the die cut block, and die cut block has so many options to choose from, and I have a few tips for you. The first tip is depending on where the image on the paper is. When it's on top, so near the edge where it's sealed in the block, then I just take out the complete piece and then I just start wiggling the paper back and forth. And this way your die cut comes loose very easy, even with the smaller and intricate pieces, without tearing it. So I'm going to pick a few more images and I take them out just in the same way. So here are all my images together that I want to use on my card. Another thing that I like to do to, well, take the white of the edge a little bit off so it has a bit more of a finished look again. I'm going to ink the edges just gently. So I want to keep a little bit of the white, but along the outside edges, so the really outer edges, I want to add a little bit of ink so it gives you a bit more of a finished result. So I've inked up all the edges, and now for my focal point I added a bit of foam to the back, so it will be a raised panel. And some added dimension always adds some interest to your card as well. So I'm going to layer all the smaller pieces using the bigger piece as a guide. So I tuck pieces under there and I also spread them out a little bit. And for this card I'm keeping most elements on the left side of my card, and I let a few of them peek out from under on the right side, and I line them up at the bottom to make a nice composition. And I have a sentiment that I want to get straight on my card even if the focal point is a little bit offset. So then I'm going to add glue to all the pieces, and I start by gluing down the parts that are first touching my card. Now watching me glue all the pieces in place, it can be quite boring, so I'm speeding things up a little bit. So I'm going to glue everything in place on the right side as well. And then I'm going to finish up with adding the focal point in place. I've added some tape to the back, so that's really easy and fast. And then I'm going to finish up with my sentiment. And I want that straight on my card, like I said, while the focal point is a bit offset. And this will give you, well, just a fun touch. And finally I add a little heart on the side. Now this already makes a nice single card. You can keep it like this. I decided to add it to a straight double card base. For that I used paper from the paper pad combined with one of the sheets from the Christmas paper pad. And this will give you another fun fall themed slimline card. And I have another quick tip. When you're done with the die cut block and you have some leftover pieces that you didn't use, put them in a plastic craft bag and add that back in the die cut block so you have all your pieces together and ready to go for your next project. For the next card I have another slimline die. I have a die set with some leaves and a sentiment, and I have one of the scrapbook papers. I made a double card again in the same way I did for the first card. I added a lighter card inside so it's easier to write on, and for the outside panel I used the scrapbook paper. And next I cut the hanging fall leaves out of 2 different colors from the Christmas paper pad, and I cut it out of a watercolor paper. And on the watercolor paper I used some fall colors to color the leaves. And now I'm going to cut the pieces apart because I want to do some layering for some added dimension. You can also choose to color the complete die cut piece in different colors. And that's pretty straightforward, just coloring the complete piece. But I wanted to show you a different way to go about this by using layers to add some dimension and interest to your card as well. So the pieces I need for my first layer are the leaves with the strings. So I cut those apart from the branch. Then I'm going to add some glue to the back of the string and the leaf. Just a tiny bit will do. And then I will layer it on the darker brown piece. And this way you get your leaf hanging on the string on the branch. So I'm going to do that for the other leaves as well. And then I'm going to cut apart the strings, because those are the pieces that I need now for my next layer. You can also choose to only cut that part out of a piece of paper, but I decided to cut the complete piece so it's better visible for you to see what I'm cutting apart. But cutting the complete piece will also give you the option to use those cutout leaves on another project. And once I've cut my string apart, I'm going to add some glue to the back and add it on the string on the watercolor paper. And once I have it in place, I also squeeze it from the sides so I know it's nicely layered on top of my watercolor paper to make sure it's lined up perfectly. And this will give you a really cool layered and dimensional branch with hanging leaves. So I did the same for all the strings. I cut them out and glued them on my base piece, and then I added some glue to the back, and now I'm ready to add it in place on my card. I added a bit on the left side of the card, and I make sure that all my leaves are hanging down straight. And using the glue will make sure that you have the option to slide a bit with the leaves and the branch to line them up nicely. This is what it looks like up close, a really cool dimensional piece on your card. And to finish the card I cut a sentiment. I've added a few pieces of foam to the back so my sentiment will be raised over one of the strings. And I already added the word fall on the card. And there you go, another fall themed card, slimline style. And as promised in the beginning, here's the complete Beauty of Fall collection for you to browse through. I hope you are inspired for your fall-themed card making and other paper crafting projects. Thanks so much for watching, and we would love to see you again next time.